N47N. sDrive 18D 136 horsepower, 143 horsepower, and 47D 20C. xDrive 20D 163 horsepower, 184 horsepower, and 47D 20C, the 47D 20A. Most BMW Zs were sold with a 2-liter turbo diesel. Until 2014, this power unit was the N47N. The timing chains of this engine, 13,528,589,971 and 11,318,570,649, last approximately 200,000 kilometers. And when stretched they make a distinct noise and clang. Once every 100,000 kilometers you will have to change the VCG system tube, 13,717,810,772. It is laid from the valve cover forward and down to the intake pipe. At first it sweats a lot of oil, and then bursts. The original will cost $50 or more than $100 if it is equipped with a heater, 13,718,516,240. With a 2-liter diesel 4 at high mileage, the gears in the turbocharger actuator, 11,658,519,476, may wear out. The actuator can be rebuilt with new gears installed in its servo drive. Such parts are sold separately. But the new actuator is not sold separately at all. The swirl flaps of the N47N motor, 11,617,812,938, can be changed separately, because they come in a separate frame. The original part will cost $70. Once every 100 to 150,000 kilometers you will have to change the sealing rings of the pipes before and after the intercooler, 13,718,596,850 and 11,618,506,782. The damper pulley, 11,238,512,072. On this engine lasts about 150,000 kilometers. A new original one costs up to $600, and replacements cost up to $200, but they last much less. These are all routine little things inherent in any BMW turbo diesel. With a mileage of about 200,000 kilometers, it is worth replacing the copper sealing rings under the injectors, 13,532,247,156, and if diesel fuel appears around the injectors, then you need to change the rubber sealing rings, 13,537,794,553, on the pipelines from the ramp to the injectors. In general, the N47N engine is quite durable and unpretentious. Worries mainly about little things every hundreds of thousands of kilometers. But it does not tolerate low-quality oil, incorrect antifreeze and unqualified maintenance. Austerity can be repaid by cranking the main bearings. N57. xDrive 30D 249 horsepower, 258 horsepower, 277 horsepower, 286 horsepower, and 57D 30A. xDrive 35D 313 horsepower, and 57D 30B. The N57 engine delighted all fans of diesel BMWs for many years, but then it often began to suffer from cranking of the main liners. This mainly applies only to twin-turbo versions. This is the xDrive 35D version for the X3 crossover. Today, most experts agree that the light alloy cylinder block of N57 biturbo engines is rather weak, and due to increased loads, the crankshaft bed is deformed. The crankshaft supports are no longer coaxial, which immediately leads to accelerated wear of the main liners. If the N57 engine turned the main bearings, but did not jam or pierce the cylinder block with any connecting rods, then there are workshops where you can restore the alignment of the crankshaft supports. And it is simply necessary to check the geometry of the crankshaft itself, because it also becomes deformed, especially after jamming. By the way, the factory provides 2 repair sizes of original liners for the N57 engine. Let us add that when unscrewing the crankshaft yokes, traces of their friction against the crankshaft bed are found, i.e. marks will be around the holes for the bolts that attach the yoke to the bed. And with runs of more than 300,000 kilometers, where occurs on the central main liner, 11,218,471,808, it is combined with thrust half rings, and the hole drilled in it for oil supply is 5 mm in diameter, while in other liners it is 6 mm. It lacks a little lubrication, which backfires on long runs. Unfortunately, there are a lot of cases of main bearings turning in the cool 3-liter BMW N57 turbo diesels. Sometimes, if the liner adjacent to the crankshaft oil seal is rotated, its flattened remains cut through and squeeze out the oil seal, and then oil flows out through this gap. The swirl flaps in the intake manifold of N57 engines for the BMW X3 are built directly into it, 11,617,811,909, i.e. do not change separately. The original intake manifold costs about $2,000, but there are several replacements available for $200, $500. Those complete aftermarket intake manifolds. In general, the N57 engine quite actively clogs the intake with mastic from soot from EGR and oil vapor, so if you don't want to deal with replacing the intake manifold or cutting out the swirl flaps, there are non-original parts for this, then it costs once every 100 to 150 kilometers remove the intake and clean it. Timing chains 13,528,490,225 and 11,318,570,649 last about 250,000 kilometers. The damper pulley for N57 engines of versions 30D and 35D is different, 11,238,511,321 and 11,238,515,002, and today the original costs more than $1,000, and replacements cost from $200 to $700, but they say that only the original pulley will cover more than 150,000 kilometers. B47, sDrive 18D 150 horsepower, B47D 20A, xDrive 20D 190 horsepower, B47D 20A. In June 2013, the N47 diesel Turbo 4 began to be replaced with the B47 engine. This motor is not created from scratch, but is an upgraded version of the N47. This engine is faster, but is weighed down by a stricter environment. Essentially, the EGR system has become more productive. The firmware is written to meet stricter environmental standards. The intake manifold flaps of the B47 engine are built into it, 11/61/8/513/655. There is no repair kit yet, but a version of a non-original intake manifold assembly is already on sale. In the long term, the same weaknesses as the N47 motor are expected. N20, sDrive 18i 170 horsepower, N20B16A, sDrive 20i 184 horsepower, N20B20A, xDrive 20i 184 horsepower, N20B20A, xDrive 28i 245 horsepower, N20B20A. In August 2011, the N20 petrol Turbo 4 appeared under the hood of the BMW X3. At first, this engine caused a lot of trouble because of the timing chains and oil pump, both were stretched. But if for some reason they did not change the oil pump circuit, then everything ended with the pump stopping and oil starvation. Typically, N20 engine chains need to be replaced every 100,000 kilometers, although during highway and fairly intensive use, the chains take longer to take care of and begin to rustle every 200,000 kilometers. The oil pump chain repair kit sells for $50 to $250, $11,417,605,366. The highest price, as usual, is for the original. By the way, the oil pump chain of later revisions has thicker internal links. The timing chain, $11,318,648,732, costs from $20 to $80 and is not sold as a convenient repair kit. Separately, you will have to buy a set of guides, $11,317,592,877 and $11,317,592,850. This is about $140 according to the original, plus a tensioner, $11,318,685,091, for $80 and a crankshaft sprocket, $11,317,603,944, for $50. There are substitutes for all this. One non-original manufacturer offers a complete repair kit with all the named items for $140. In addition, you will have to change another dozen two positions. These are various seals and screws from the pan to the valve cover, which will have to be removed to replace the timing chain of the N20 engine. The work will take about 7 hours. Once again, every 100,000 kilometers you will have to change the heat exchanger gaskets, 11,428,637,820 and 11428, 637,821 valve cover, 11,127,588,418, and vacuum pump 11,127,507,217. In the VKG system, a fog tube 11,127,588,417, and a burst valve cover membrane 11,127,588,412 will require replacement, which will cause oil consumption and smoking. the same valve cover is sold separately, or the VKG membrane is produced separately by third-party manufacturers. There are a lot of offers, because a complete original valve cover costs $340. Even with the N20 engine, the Vanos clutch of the intake camshaft, 11,367,583,819, can crackle and cause errors with regularity once every 150,000 kilometers. The original one costs $500, a decent analog costs up to $400, and the cheapest options cost $100. The N20 engine may also have a ringing gate, a bypass valve in the hot part of the turbine, but a high-quality one-time repair will eliminate this problem for a long time. Well, let's not forget about the pump. It's electric, but after several improvements it lasts for 200,000 kilometers or even more. The original one costs $500, 11,518,635,089, and a decent analog costs $350. The main thing you need to know about the N20 is that it is better to operate it in direct access to qualified BMW service and high-quality spare parts. Many people consider this engine to be very worthy. N52N xDrive 28i 258 horsepower, N52B30A. Let's talk about gasoline 6s. The second generation BMW X3 was produced with a straight 6 petrol engine for a very short time, until March 2012. This engine was replaced with an N20 Turbo 4 within 6 months. With the N52 engine of the latest revisions, everything is not easy. It runs 200,000 kilometers without any problems if the owners were adequate and understood what they were dealing with. To avoid serious problems, the oil in it needs to be changed every 7,500 kilometers. If you don't do this, then problems start creeping in from everywhere, starting with oil running through all the gaskets, ending with problems with valvetronic shafts, knocking of the exhaust camshaft in a worn bed, falling off DISA flaps. There are 2 of them, and other troubles. Yes, there are many cases when an N52 travels 500,000 kilometers without serious investments and continues to drive. You need to understand that such specimens, in addition, do not crawl through city traffic jams and are maintained competently. N55 xDrive 35i 306 horsepower, N55B30A, the most powerful version of the second generation BMW X3, appeared back in the 2011 model year. Under its hood is an N55 engine. In general, this is the older brother of the N20 motor. Somewhat top-end engine with 306 horsepower. Even less capricious than the naturally aspirated N52, but the principles of dealing with it are the same. Change the oil more often and inspect it every oil change and read the fault codes. This engine will not fall apart, but will not save on maintenance. ZF8 HP 45 8 Street automatic transmission. ZF8 HP 78 Street automatic transmission. All versions of the BMW X3 were equipped with a ZF8 horsepower automatic transmission. Time has shown that this automatic transmission is very reliable, i.e. it takes care of more than 300,000 kilometers without problems. It can be repaired relatively inexpensively if you do a major overhaul immediately after the kicks appear. The original oil for this transmission costs $50 to $70 per 1 liter, 83,222,289,720, and decent analogs cost $12 per liter. The filter is located in the pan, i.e. built right into it. Such a filter pan, 24,118,612,901, costs from $40 to $200. The oil should be changed every 50,000 kilometers. It is possible twice as often, but the filter pan can be changed every 2 replacements. Once every 80 to 100,000 kilometer you need to change the electrical connector bushing, 05012220929, to prevent oil leakage through it. Before restyling, the BMW X3 was equipped with an ATC 450 transfer case, and after restyling, an AC45L. By the way, transfer cases are interchangeable, but in order for a pre-restyling car to be able to adequately control the new transfer case, you need to change the ICM unit, activate everything and make friends using a proprietary scanner. The ATC 450 transfer case is the most unreliable. The clutches and transfer drum of the ATC 450 wear out sooner or later because there is no oil pump in it, and oil is supplied to the clutches by splashing. As a result, jerks and twitches appear during acceleration, then the drive to the front axle stops engaging. Or, when turning, the car will seem to run into an invisible obstacle. It will practically not move due to the fact that the drive to the front axle is not turned off. In order to somehow extend the life of the ATC 450 transfer case, you need to change its oil every 50,000 kilometers. A special branded one, 83,222,409,710, costs up to $70 per liter, which is enough for a replacement. Analogs are 3 times cheaper. The oil is changed by pumping it out with a syringe with a long hose, and the most sophisticated BMW fans even lower the transfer case, removing the entire transmission support. This way all the oil will drain closer to its rear wall. In general, wear of the ATC 450 transfer case is only a matter of time. It lasts a long time only during highway operation, i.e. when the front axle drive does not engage. At disassembly sites, such a transfer case costs $300, $500, but they may already show considerable wear. But there are offers for overcapitalized transfer cases, which are sold in exchange for a worn one. The AT45L transfer case received a small gear pump, which provides more active lubrication of the clutch pack through which the front axle is connected. It lasts longer, but also requires special oil changes. Although there is no drain plug, and the manufacturer believes that it is filled with oil for its entire service life, over time the BMW X3 transmission will begin to sweat oil and openly leak the rear gearbox seals. 31,507,609,535 and 33,107,564,416. The front gearbox, 31,521,428,678 and 33,107,505,601, and the transfer case, 27,107,539,262, 27,107,546,667 and 2,710,759,345. The front and rear gearboxes use transmission oil of different grades with tolerances G2 and G1, respectively 83,222,413,511, 83,222,295,532, 0.5 and 1.5 liters for full filling. The original oil is expensive, but it is still worth updating at least once every 75,000 kilometers. The front driveshaft has a very short spline part. The effective length of the splines is only 1.5 centimeters, and the length of the splines in the transfer case is 5 centimeters. All this leads to the fact that the splines of the front driveshaft wear out until play and vibrations appear. It can all end with the cardan turning or even breaking with the pan being pierced. Specialized workshops for repairing cardan shafts cope with this design flaw. They lengthen the splines of the cardan shaft, which ensures a reliable connection with the transfer case for a long time. On the right side of the transfer case there is a ground wire, 12,427,621,063, which connects its body and the bottom. It extends over the transmission mount and is hidden by a heat shield. Due to the reagents, this wire corrodes and bursts. Because of such a seemingly harmless thing, the engine will not start. You'll have to go to the service station with a tow truck. It is not necessary to buy a new original wire that does not have any insulation. You can make your own insulated wire. The steering rack of the BMW X3 in this body is considered weak. It begins to knock due to wear on the 2 lower bearings of the steering shaft. The knock appears directly in the rack teeth at the junction with the worm shaft. First, middle needle bearing wears out, then the lower roller bearing. There is also an upper needle bearing, which dies due to moisture entering it through a worn oil seal. By the way, this electric steering rack may rattle after work on the front suspension if radial loads are allowed on the shaft. Roughly speaking, the tie rods should be released so that they do not transfer the wrong loads to the rack. It has a smaller support area than any hydraulic rack. As for repairs, the bearings and seal can be replaced. And it's better to do all this in advance, especially if there are doubts about the seal's tightness. Dirt and moisture will cause corrosion of the shaft, so it will have to be ground and even sharpened, rather than just changing the bearings. The front suspension of the BMW X3 is McPherson strut with a separate lower arm. It cannot be said that the suspension of this crossover is fragile, but replacements of silent blocks and even shock absorbers with support bearings began already after a mileage of about 100,000 kilometers. Lower arm silent blocks, 31,106,786,951 and 31,106,786,959, cost up to $50 for the original, and replacements cost up to $20. The front arm ball joint can be purchased separately from $30 to $70 for the original, 31,106,787,665. Original passive front shock absorbers, 31,316,796,315, cost $300. Good analogs are half the price. Electronically adjustable shock absorbers, 37,116,797,025. will cost up to $800. There are several very cheap substitutes, 4 times cheaper. Front support bearings 31,306,852,158 will cost between $40 and $150. Front wheel bearings 31,206,870,725 cost between $70 and $300. The rear suspension lasts an average of 200,000 kilometers before replacement. Each wheel swings on 5 levers. Many silent blocks can be purchased separately. The floating silent block 33,326,790,493, which connects the trunnion to the largest lever, usually fails first and begins to creak. It costs between $25 and $55. The lower front silent block 33,306,786,980 of the axle, and the top one 33,306,786,993 cost up to $25 and $35, respectively. Suspension arms cost from $100 to $250 for the original. They all have analogs, and non-original silent blocks are also sold separately. Rear wheel bearings cost between $50 and $100, 33,406,787,015. A few more wet winters with an abundance of reagents on the roads lead to serious corrosion of the lower coils of the rear springs, the areas affected by rust break off by spring. New rear springs 33,536,787,203 cost $250, while replacements cost about $100. If the BMW X3 is equipped with xenon or LED headlights, the taillights will have LED taillights. Such dimensions one day stop shining due to a defect in the LED driver, that is, the control board. The resistor solder on the board is coming off. The resistor legs can be soldered, or you can buy a non-original driver, which is even better than the original Vallejo B003809.2. Over time, the seal made of double-sided tape under the central brake light in the BMW X3 dries out, so after a car wash or heavy rain, either the trunk curtain or the trunk floor gets wet. The problem can be solved simply. You need to remove the brake light. Get rid of the remnants of the old seal and stick on a new one. Sometimes there are cases of water getting into the button on the trunk door, but this only happens if the frame of this button is not installed correctly or if its fasteners are broken. Less often, water gets into the trunk and flows into a niche along the corrugated wires from above in the trunk door opening. Poor adjustment of the trunk door itself can also be to blame for water getting into the trunk. The BMW X3 also has a battery in the trunk. The wire 61,129,277,916 from the positive terminal bifurcates and goes out under the bottom, stretches forward into the engine compartment. The power part of the wire comes out through a terminal with a screw and nut. They are placed in an insulating sleeve. The problem is that this threaded connection is susceptible to corrosion, which eats away at it and the terminals on either side of the connection. Sometimes the terminal on the trunk side just falls off. You'll be lucky if it doesn't touch the body and start shorting out or even catching fire. In general, you need to keep an eye on this terminal. Either clean it and preserve it on both sides of the body, i.e. from the inside of the trunk and from the bottom, or completely replace this connection. On the restyled X3, the wire is routed differently. It enters the body through a hole and is protected by a tube. But the connecting terminal between the long outer wire and the inner short one to the battery is present. It is screwed to the trunk floor next to the battery. But this place should still be protected from corrosion because moisture may get in here. The inside handles of the front doors are different. On the driver's side there is a recessed liner, and on the navigator's door there is a full-fledged handle. Over time they both turn into something terrible. The coating on the driver's handle peels off, and then it even cracks. The grip is starting to look like mice have been chewing on it. What to do about it? Replacement parts are sold in China. Sometimes the front door windows start to creak. The problem is that the lower rollers of the window lifters are located low and water gets into them, which flows down inside the door. If you remove the door card and lubricate the lower rollers, the squeak will disappear. Often on these cars the glove compartment lid comes off, i.e. in the closed position, the glove compartment lid begins to bulge on the left side. You will have to remove it, add glue between the protruding skin and its base, and compress it with clamps for a day. There are no clips, only glue helps. Sometimes it happens that in drive mode, when stopping, a gong constantly sounds, i.e. bell. A message appears on the instrument panel that drive is on. At the same time, the automatic transmission selector illumination does not fully work. In this case, you will have to change the automatic transmission selector to a used one. That is where the problem lies. The new selector is very expensive.